So I was thinking, I mean, we have a nice intro and all that, but what if we were doing, the horror boys were back in town?
Like the boys were back in town?
Yeah, but it's the horror boys.
I can't really sing, so that'd have to be you.
Okay, what about do you remember the Venga boys?
The Venga boys?
The Venga bus is coming. But instead we do, the horror boys are coming. The horror boys are coming. The horror boys are coming. What do you think of that one?
It's up to you. This reminds me of like those advertisement things you made where you were imitating like Kanye and stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
Okay, so now I am obligated to play one of those. I'm going to just put one of those in right now, and then we'll get straight into some really harsh criticism, some very intellectual stuff. We're the Horror Boys. I'm Steven.
I'm Tanner.
And I'll play should I do the Wu-Tang one or the Bound 2 one?
Do the Bound 2 one.
Okay, that's coming in right now.
You're listening to KBTL El Dorado, Kansas, 88.1 The Grizz, the best hip-hop station in all of Butler County.
I know you're tired of
Listening,
with no
hip-hop,
no
hip-hop,
just grab
our station,
no leaving this party with
hip-hop, no hip-hop, no
honey.
All the mother
stations,
blame and you know it now. When the real
station,
hold you down, you supposed to
dance.
down.
88.1.
Down.
88.1. Honey.
The Grizz.
And we're back. That was horrible. I'm sorry to have subjected you guys to that.
I don't know. That has a soft spot in my heart. I don't know. I've always loved it.
For some context, I did those as ad spots for the radio program I was in college. Got an A every semester, so that's something.
Oh, yeah.
We covered 3 movies tonight. If you listen to the first episode, you heard me discuss which ones we're picking. We watched Ghosts of Mars, Blair Witch 2, and Dracula 2000. They are all very loosely connected in having similar soundtracks. I believe Blair Witch 2 and Dracula 2000 both have Dracula, and they're all very edgy, kind of bad early 2000s horror movies.
Yeah, it definitely felt like, well, they're early 2000s, but it felt like we were in the 90s for all of these movies, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
No.
Like, it was like early 2000s, but the filmmakers were still trying to do, like, 90s cool.
For sure. Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from.
And that's why every movie we watched was awful. No, I'm just kidding. But
2 of the movies were awful.
we had more awful than good. I mean, even the movie we liked, it had several awful things in it, even though we overall thought it was good. But even adding just that little bit of awfulness to the other 2 movies, which were totally awful, really sort of upset the balance this week.
I think we're just fortunate that Tanner and I watched Blair Witch 2 and Dracula 2000 back to back, and it was one of the least tolerable movie watching experiences I've ever had. It was really pretty miserable.
Well, since we've been watching movies together, I think that pairing was literally the worst experience we've ever had. Like, I can't think of a worse one. I think Homie Spallone was better than these two together.
Dare.
No, I do. We at least had some. It was so like blatantly offensive and not funny that it at least had some talking points. These are just like almost intolerable to sit through.
Here's how bad Dracula 2000 was. I actually had to go back and rewatch about 45 minutes of the movie the next day because I could not remember what happened.
Yeah, I had a similar problem, and I wasn't falling asleep like you. I think most of it had to do with the fact that a lot of the dialogue from Gerard Butler's Dracula was just totally unintelligible.
Yeah, I had guests over, so I kept turning down the volume. And Emily went to bed. My girlfriend went to bed about 35 minutes into it. And so I was watching it on the couch, and I flipped over onto my back with my head turned towards it. And then I slowly started, my head just creeped its way up until I was looking at the ceiling with my eyes kind of pointed towards the TV. And eventually I just wasn't watching it at all, thus leading to the need for the rewatch, which was slightly more tolerable the next day.
Was it tolerable?
No, not really. It was kind of funny in that scenario. Just directly after Blair Witch 2, which is just miserable.
Yeah, do you think we should just go ahead and get into Blair Witch 2?
Yeah, let's do that.
So we watched Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, which was a 2000 movie. It came only a year after the first Blair Witch Project.
I couldn't tell at all while watching it. I could not tell.
You couldn't tell that it was slapped together in like a really tiny amount of time.
How long do you think the shoot for that went on?
I don't know, because a lot of it's in the same location, so I'd imagine it wasn't very long at all. I know they did reshoots, though. It's directed by Joe Berlinger, who
we're a fan of.
Yeah,
we are a fan of this director.
We are. This is his first and last feature film, because he's a documentarian by nature. He did all the Paradise Lost films about the West Memphis Three. A movie I watched recently by him is called Crude, which is about oil companies in South America and all that insanity. And those are all pretty well done. Although Steven will talk about some of the detractors of even his documentary filmmaking.
Yeah, so the Paradise Lost movies, the first one tells a really heartbreaking story of three kids who were more than likely falsely accused of a murder just because they wear, black t-shirts and listen to Metallica. And then the second one really, really builds this narrative where someone is the killer without a ton of evidence to support it. And in that regard, it's a pretty horrifying character study. But then I think 12 years later, he made Paradise Lost 3, and he throws that theory out the window. So this guy whose son was murdered for 12 years, everyone just thought he was the guy who killed 3 children and cut off their genitals, which is terrible.
And even though that's horrible, you can tell Berlinger is a great filmmaker because of how he casts that villain.
Oh, the last scene of Paradise Lost 2 where that guy is singing his Christian songs is so horrifying.
Yeah, it's some of the best documentary work I've ever seen. And he's been at it for a while. Like, I saw Brothers Keeper, which is a similar sort of framing a murderer through a documentary. But in this case, he was a little more sympathetic. So that's another interesting part of his filmography. But he directed this, and he was very unhappy with the decisions the studio made, because I guess there were quite a few reshoots to make it seem more like a traditional horror film. He wanted more ambiguity, which I already don't know what happened in the film, but I don't know if that's because it was ambiguous or because it was just stupid.
We should say that even when it's not ambiguous, it's still terrible.
Yeah. There's I can only think of one scene. Not even a scene. One single facet of the movie I enjoyed. Let's give a little plot summary. In the sequel to Blair Witch Project, they acknowledge that the first film. Well, they acknowledge the existence of the first film, so it's already set up as kind of a meta story. And a group of fans of the first film go into the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland, where the original was supposedly shot. And then, of course, craziness happens, but it's all sort of a muddled mess. We'll get into that later. The only person with, quote-unquote star clout in this movie is Jeffrey Donovan. Everyone else has kind of fallen by the wayside in recent years.
Oof. I don't even know how to talk about this movie. It was so bad. So the movie starts out trying to capture the hysteria around the Blair Witch Project. And so the base level idea of the movie, where these fans are trying to recapture the events is fascinating, and some of the things they try to do in it are interesting. Like, it's not your generic, just we're redoing the first movie. There are some interesting things going on here, but it is executed so horribly, and it is just impossible to follow, that there's little to no enjoyment to get out of it. Which is a shame, because I'd seen some of this before. I remembered most of it took place in a warehouse, but I was hoping that would work out. Because I have a couple friends on Letterboxd who like this movie. So I thought, maybe, misunderstood classic.
Well,
that is not the case.
Well, were those some of the more satirical reviews?
No. One of my friends who reviews a ton of Giallo movies, he seems to generally have pretty good taste, has it at 3.5 stars.
Oh, wow. Those listening to this should definitely check out some of the Letterboxd reviews, especially the 5-star ones, because they tend to be pretty funny. It's good reading. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot to like about this movie. The scares weren't scary.
There were no scares. There were no, like, the original movie is very creepy and very subtle, and the Adam Wingard movie that came out in 2016, which I think's pretty alright, that ups it with modern horror sensibilities, but still has, like, the feel of the original. It has the heart to an extent.
Yeah.
This is trying to be much deeper than it needs to be, because the director shoehorns in the message of the Paradise Lost films into his stupid horror movie. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and he's got, like, a stereotypical goth girl, a stereotypical Wiccan girl, and he tries to make them out to be like some of the belittled people that get framed for things they didn't do, like in Paradise Lost. And it just doesn't work in this.
Well, at the same time, he presents them as the villains for most of it. Like, they're the two people you're supposed to be suspecting. So much so that even the girl who has a miscarriage in the movie is presented to be the villain at one point, because it's like a whodunit to an extent, like who is the witch infiltrating everything. It came across a little misogynistic to me, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to give any spoiler warnings, because no one should ever watch this film. But it turns out that everybody is being manipulated by, like, the woods themselves, kind of, like, that kind of bullshit. But,
on a base level, that could be interesting. That could be very creepy.
Yeah, but first of all, it's not a found footage film for the most part. And when they utilize found footage, it's either used badly or just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
There's a part where they think they captured a ghost on camera, and they zoom in on it, and they're like, oh, that's a naked woman. And then it turns out that it's just the Wiccan girl naked, because they wanted to show her naked. And then later they have the goth girl naked on the camera, because they wanted to show her naked.
There's not a whole lot to like about this movie, but one single, 5 seconds of this movie are like when the goth girl goes into the convenience store and sees a guy working on a refrigerator, and he's like clearly sort of off, and I can't remember what he says to her, but it's something like, I'm finished with it now. And it's like, I don't know, it's like the only moment where the film is actually like kind of interesting, because it has that Lynchian vibe.
But even then, it's not like the fun kind of Lynchian or even Tim and Eric sort of, yeah, small town people are like this. It's that gross, like, oh, small town people are mongoloids sort of vibe, which I never like. It's a Rodney Dangerfield sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's
and
bottom of the barrel humor with
what does
some substance.
What does the one guy say? Something like, the gene pool isn't very deep here, or something like that. If you dive in, you'll crack your skull.
Yeah, and then they just have close-ups on them.
There's some pretty quotable lines in this movie, though. What's your favorite, Steven?
I cannot remember a single line from this movie.
We're all virgins in this van.
Oh, I did write that down in my notebook. Now that what did that mean?
Sorry, I have no idea what it means. It literally, and it doesn't really have much context within the movie itself.
Well, there's just some weird tropes in this movie that don't even make sense. The goth girl, when they first enter the woods, there's a writer character and his wife, and she goes up, or girlfriend, I guess, and she goes up to the girlfriend and she says, so, how long have you been pregnant? And that trope always annoys me. Like, it never makes sense. Women just can't tell when other women are pregnant.
Well, she's kind of psychic.
Yeah, then later on she's just psychic, and they don't go into any detail about that. She can just see things in her mind.
Yeah, except she couldn't see that she was in a terrible, awful movie and drop herself from the cast.
We should... I think possibly the worst scene in the movie, other than the twist at the end, which isn't really a twist because it still doesn't make sense, is the first really weird event that happens when they spend the night in the woods. They wake up and they try to capture like the craziness that someone would experience in that time, but it is just so awkwardly framed and executed. Like everyone on set didn't actually have any idea what they were doing.
Yeah.
And sometimes in a meta way that can work, but it just doesn't in this movie. It feels like a student film. It's so cringy.
Yeah, you're talking like when all the shredded paper is flying everywhere.
Yeah, it's
not.
someone wrote down some rigid dialogue and then they made 3 of the characters say their lines line after line with like barely any camera movement.
It's not well done. It's also just a bore to sit through.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm glad the director sticks to documentaries now.
It's funny bad until they get to the warehouse, and then basically nothing happens until the murders start happening, and even then it's just like, oh, we found the girl naked in the closet.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. It just feels like one of those early 2000s movies that you watch now to make fun of, but eventually it just gets so like it thinks it's so smart once they get into that warehouse, and it's so dumb.
Yeah, I would be shocked if I learned that this movie had a script, like a fully working script, when they got there. I mean, there are definitely lines that they're saying because they're so dumb none of the cast would have come up with them. Like, just really pretentious lines of dialogue. I can't remember what he says. Maybe I'll put it in here. But during the party scene, before they wake up and no one knows what's going on, there is just some of the worst pretentious dialogue I've ever heard. People give Jim Morrison shit, but this is like a pretentious kid wanting to be Jim Morrison. It is so bad.
That's a good comparison, actually.
I don't get the hate. People, there's this new thing going on where Kurt Cobain's and Jim Morrison's, people say they don't have anything interesting to say about the human experience, but I feel like just being able to get into that headspace at the time of them recording, I think that still has merit.
Yeah, well, I think they were just so spammed at some point that people just say that to be counterculture.
Oh, for sure. And I think in a way this movie really gets you into the headspace of an awful, unlikable, pretentious person in the early 2000s who listens to Nickelback and thinks that fits in with the soundtrack with trip hop, you know?
Oh yeah, you can tell Berlinger did a documentary with Metallica, just based on this movie alone, almost.
You know, when I watched Paradise Lost, I thought Metallica was there as an ode to the Memphis 3, but I think Berlinger just thought that would be cool now.
Oh, I think the reason he was interested in the West Memphis 3 is because they liked Metallica. I mean, I could be wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Man, I like Metallica too.
Yeah, I gotta help these fellow Metallica fans.
Us metalheads gotta stay together, man. I really don't have much more to say about this movie. It's just horrible, unwatchable.
Yeah, on Letterboxd, I think I gave it a 1 star, but I could see how that could move down to a half star out of 5.
If I ever rewatched it, I would probably move it down to a half star.
Yeah, it just is barely watchable at points, and I think that's why I gave it that extra half star, but I feel like I would not be able to sit through it again.
Honestly, and I mean this honestly, Homie Spalomi was more entertaining.
Yeah, I'd watch Homie Spaloni again in a second. We'll do an audio track commentary for that.
Should we do that?
No. Absolutely not.
Okay.
I don't actually want to watch that ever again.
All right, so we're throwing this out there to the fans. Please do not, and I repeat, do not watch Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows.
It's actually Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2.
Shut up.
Which is also a stupid title. It's a stupid title. I just wanted to point out that the title's stupid. But, yeah. And we followed that up with, a movie we thought would be way better, and it wound up being. I enjoyed it marginally more, like barely more.
If we had watched Dracula 2000 first, I probably would have enjoyed it substantially more, but just the same exact level of stuff, like incoherent edge, just ugh. I don't want to be a part of this. I want to forget about this movement directly after one of the worst things I've ever watched. Just made it no fun at all.
Yeah. Well, and I think if we had have watched Book of Shadows after Dracula 2000, we would have stopped it halfway through.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we would not have finished it. I
On the
almost
other
stopped
side of
Dracula
things.
2000.
Yeah. So a little background on Dracula 2000, as the title might suggest. It's also from 2000, directed by Patrick Lussier, but I'm going to call him Lussier because I doubt he pronounces it the French way. It actually has 2 sequels also directed by him, which...
One of which has Rutger Hauer as Dracula, so we will probably get around to these at some point.
Yeah, we'll probably watch that in the future just because we have an immense love for Rutger Hauer. It's got Gerard Butler as Dracula, which is probably the worst casting choice I've ever encountered. One good casting choice, however, was Christopher Plummer as Van Helsing.
He's barely in it.
Yeah, he's barely in it, but he was pretty good at his job for those 2 seconds. I wrote down this brief summary, which also has a punchline, so stay with me here. I probably shouldn't point that out. Thieves try to steal stuff from Van Helsing and release a Gerard Butler mumbling Dracula, who then advertises for the New Orleans Virgin Megastore. I don't know. I didn't have a high opinion of this movie.
Again, I think I would have enjoyed it more had it not been directly after Blair Witch 2.
Yeah.
Because when I rewatched it the next day, the action is competently shot. Like, there's some fun stuff in there on a let's make fun of this level.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tolerable. If it were on TV, I would have watched it. On the Sci-Fi Channel, I would have watched this movie.
Oh, I think I would have too, honestly. I mean, if I had seen the scene where Omar Epps' head comes flying off on TV, I would have stuck with it for sure.
Oh, yeah. And you have Jennifer Esposito absolutely chewing the scenery in this. And I'm not, like, a big fan of her. I haven't seen her in a ton of stuff. But her performance in this is delightful. She is just going for it.
Like, she's really attractive, but I think she's genuinely a good actress. I don't want to sound creepy or anything. She has been booked in the worst movies imaginable. Like, her agent should be shot and thrown in a ditch because I feel like...
I bet she has a lot of money.
She probably does, but I feel like she has acting clout that just never, ever got used.
I was watching this movie and I was like, I can't tell if she's just pretty, but I'm pretty sure she's giving a good performance in this absolutely abysmal movie.
No, like, I remember watching Master of Disguise, and she is trying so hard to save that garbage fire.
I haven't seen that since theaters, but I still feel bad for making my dad see that. I mean, he complains about it to this day, so much so that I got it for him on VHS for Christmas this year.
Oh, it's, like, it's bad, but it's definitely, like, bad good, I would say. I'd watch it again. I watched that all the time as a kid.
We could do that for this podcast. I don't know when it would fit in, but we'll get to it at some point.
I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't watch it so my fond childhood memories don't get just blasted.
Kangaroo Jack, Master of Disguise double feature.
Well, no one liked Kangaroo Jack, even as a kid, because it was not a kid's movie and also sucked.
It's like half a mob film. It's just a normal bad mob film, and then it becomes a kid's movie out of nowhere. It's very odd.
Yeah.
We should get back to Dracula.
What did you find was, like, appealing about this film?
So Christopher Plummer hits that kind of like Michael Gough in Batman and Robin and Batman Forever, lovable Alfred sort of level, you know?
Yeah.
And so I appreciated that. Some of the like cheesy shots, like where Christopher Plummer realizes the vampire's on the loose, so he flips over, he hits a button, and it opens up his like wall of vampire hunting gear. That made me think, okay, this is going to be fun. There's some interesting set pieces. There's a kind of cool set piece on a plane where Dracula's waking up for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
If that weren't a better film, it could be cool. I feel like maybe the screenplay could have been pretty fun in better hands.
I would agree with that. I think the set pieces of this were, like, really creative, but then the action never got as like crazy and like outlandish as it probably should have. I don't know if you felt the same way.
No, I agree. Like, every now and then someone got their head chopped off, and I thought that was really fun, but it was so few and far between, and the movie was just too long to make that excusable. There needed to be more gore. Most of the movie is either this really, really boring, unlikable girl who's supposed to look like Audrey Tautou. She was just so dull.
Our two leads are just not good.
Yeah.
Because, like, I can't, like, you literally cannot understand Gerard Butler at all. It wasn't the audio. It was like you could hear everyone else, but every time he talked, it was just like, you know, like, I hope that comes through on audio, but...
Well, it was crazy to me because I don't love Gerard Butler, but when he's in a campy movie, he can run it with the best of them, you know? And not in that at all.
Well, I don't think he took this as campy. I think he was...
You think that's it?
Yeah, I think he was taking it as a serious role.
That is pathetic.
Yeah. Well, I think he was trying to pull, like, you know, like a theater Dracula, because that's like a pretty popular stage play now, but that's the sort of impression I got was like really bad theater acting.
Yeah, I got that vibe too. The way they tried to make him just like this sex demon was really, really uncomfortable for me.
Well, back in 2000, he looked pretty hot. Like, all
Did
that
he?
black and the... Yeah, that was back when trench coats were sexy and okay and not like something you backed away from rapidly.
You'd think Columbine would have really put a stop to that, but it didn't. They stuck around for a couple years after that, thanks to The Matrix.
Oh, yeah. Well, when was The Matrix from?
99, I think?
This was probably trying to pull a Matrix.
Oh, everything after The Matrix. Matrix and Blade. I think it was probably more influenced by Blade than The Matrix. So our leads are Johnny Lee Miller, who is best known for being Angelina Jolie's ex-husband.
Well, he's also Sherlock Holmes now.
Is he on what?
The TV show Elementary.
Is that still running?
Yes, I think maybe. But that's not what he's not best known for that. He's best known for Train Spotting. Come on, Steven.
Oh, I forgot he was in that.
He was Sick Boy.
I didn't know he existed until Emily showed me pictures of him with Angelina Jolie while we were watching the movie.
I forgot he was married to her. So who's the real loser here, Angelina Jolie or Johnny Lee Miller?
Johnny Lee Miller.
Yeah, you're probably right.
But I mean, anyone who's been married to Angelina Jolie isn't that bad, let's be real.
Yeah, that's true.
There are some pretty wasted performances in this. Like, Nathan Fillion's in it, but doesn't do anything.
Yeah, he was listed like pretty high up on the cast list. So I, for some reason, expected way more of him, but...
Because he wasn't a star when this came out.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Well, a lot of the thieves in the beginning are like... Omar Epps is honestly kind of wasted.
Yeah.
Because he's a better villain in this than Gerard Butler ever is.
How great would it have been if Gerard Butler died immediately and then Omar Epps became the villain?
Yeah, well, like, let's just switch it around so Gerard Butler's the thief and Omar Epps is Dracula. But people were probably like, we can't have a black Dracula, you know?
Which is crazy, because you had Blackula like 30 years before this was made, so...
I mean, that was probably not a studio discussion, but that's just my dream casting. I was actually super impressed by Omar Epps in this.
He's always pretty fun.
Yeah, oh, well, like, I forgot about him in Scream 2.
Yeah.
That's a great role. He dies pretty early on in that, too.
So does Will Smith's wife, Jaden Pinkett Smith, but she's great in that opening scene.
Oh, yeah. Well, that may have been my favorite Scream opening scene, but we're getting off track again. This did just have the tone of edgy 2000s. For some reason, the majority of it is shot in a Virgin Megastore, which don't even exist in the United States. Well, like, they used to, but they don't exist in the United States anymore, so
I only vaguely remember them existing.
Well, in that sense, this is already, like, super dated. Just because of all the, like, unnecessary ad placement.
I wish we had a horror movie sponsored by Yahoo or AOL.
Yeah, so we could just look things up on AOL.
That'd be great. The Amazing Spider-Man has scenes where the Peter Parker's using Bing. How much better would it have been if it had been AOL?
Oh, man. I'm just amazed that he's using Bing. Like, even that seems out of place in a film. You're already like, oh, that's ad placement. Because no one has ever used Bing.
My dad uses Bing.
No. Tell him to quit.
He just switched to DuckDuckGo.
Oh, I did too.
I'm still using Google.
I switched to DuckDuckGo, and I got that Mozilla plugin that puts Facebook in a container.
Nobody cares. Keep going.
It puts Facebook in... this is just me at you.
Nobody puts Facebook in a container.
I do. I'm sorry. Dracula 2000, we did pretty good on Blair Witch 2, but we're rambling on this one. I'm rambling
I don't
on
think
this one.
neither of us watched the movie.
Well, we did, but it just got boring pretty fast. And like there was no like thing that grabbed me that made me want to like keep watching. There were no stakes there were a lot of stakes driven into vampires' hearts, but there were no like stakes for me where I wanted to keep watching.
Well, it was just really methodical in a boring way. I mean, if you're gonna reinvent Dracula, that's a fun idea, but they just do it in like, yeah, Dracula's still sexy and he's picking up chicks, but this time he's doing it in 2000s clothing, and it's a little edgier, it's a little sexier than you've seen before. He's on the ceiling making love, which is a very awkward and
Yeah.
there's penetration happening there. It's very graphic in an odd way.
Well, in my opinion, I think that the movie is good up until Dracula shows up. Like, I liked all the raid stuff.
Yeah, no. Until Dracula shows up, it's a fun little heist film for a bit, and then the set piece on the plane is kind of cool, and then the second Gerard Butler really enters the picture, the movie just grinds to a halt.
Well, that's when, like, it seems like the stakes end. We aren't given enough desire to want to kill Dracula. Does that make sense? Like, he's not threatening. He just seems to be doing his own thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then the girl he's chasing after isn't really... We don't really get that much with her before then. They introduce her briefly. Like, it just cuts to New Orleans at one point, and she's there. And I'm like, what's she doing here? And then it turns out she's Christopher Plummer's daughter, and I didn't care. Then I never cared again, the rest of the movie. I couldn't tell you what Johnny Lee Miller was doing for most of this film.
I couldn't either. I like the idea that he was set up as Van Helsing's apprentice, but I wish Van Helsing had have been alive for longer, even if he wasn't doing action. Because Christopher Plummer actually is one of the highlights of the film.
Christopher Plummer gets kicked into a glass cabinet or something. Is that how he died? I don't even remember.
Yeah, it's a lame death.
That's a bad death. I mean, he's old. That's kind of realistic.
It's like, at least Dracula could have, like, broken his spine or something, you know?
It's just The Dark Knight Rises.
Cracked him in half.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
It just never got that sort of craziness that I think it needed. Maybe the sequels do.
I think the last 15 minutes kind of deliver on what you want from the most of the movie. You get Jennifer Esposito getting her head chopped off. You get Dracula getting hung from a cross, and then you learn that he's Judas, but the the noose doesn't snap or something. Oh man, it's so dumb, and it's not as fun as it needs to be.
It's well, like even that that sort of revelation is just so edgy in 2000s.
Well,
know?
and it's not the first time it's been done. Like it's just Salem's Lot.
Yeah, I didn't know that because I don't read a lot of Stephen King, but stealing ideas from Stephen King, how low can you go?
All the way to the floor. So let's discuss the ending a bit. Dracula is holding on to the main lady, Mary Helsing or whatever her name is, and she gets dropped, she falls, and she dies, but then her vampire powers kick in, and then he looks down at her and he says, "I release you." And then her eyes turn blue, like weird blue. Why did he do that? Was there an explanation?
No. I mean, that's part of the reason there are no stakes, is because Dracula is sort of an anti-hero. It's not really an anti-hero, but he's like a sympathetic character, and that makes literally no sense at all.
He's sympathetic in a boring way. Like, he's not killing anyone. He's just turning everyone in the movie into his vampire goons.
Yeah, and
And
even
then at the end they die, and then he dies, and then the movie ends.
well, even just having an ounce of sympathy for Dracula automatically ruins the character because you're supposed to just be terrified of this powerful being, and like I never was.
I like the idea of Dracula being sympathetic at first, and then the more you see how much of a monster and not real human he is, the less you grow to hate him. But that doesn't happen in this movie.
Yeah, well, you barely see him as a monster, like in the very beginning. And then it's just handsome Gerard Butler with
Walking
hair.
around like a mall. I mean, a lot of the movie is Dracula in a mall.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
There should have been fish out of water gags. If this movie had been goofier, it would have been a lot better.
Majority of those scenes are just girls fawning at him.
Which is just weird because he looks so stupid.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a trench coat. Like, what? Like, girls avert their eyes when they see a guy in a trench coat.
Maybe it's because we weren't present enough in the early 2000s. Maybe we have it all wrong.
I guess that's true. But I'm going to pin this movie up against two others, and I want to know your snap judgment, okay?
Okay.
Dracula 2000 or Van Helsing, that movie
Van
with
Helsing.
Hugh Jackman. Okay.
Van Helsing 100%.
Okay.
It's terrible, but the CG's so bad and there's constantly stuff happening that it's far more watchable.
Yeah. I felt the same way, I gotta say. Okay, one more. Dracula 2000 or Dracula 1970 AD?
What is that? I don't know what that
Oh,
is.
that's a Hammer film. I thought you'd seen all the Hammer films.
No, I've seen a couple of the early ones. Like, Emily's dad brought over a 4-pack the day Christopher Lee died, and we pretty much just marathoned those. But that's most of my exposure to the Hammer movies for the Dracula.
Well, I'd say I liked the 1971 more. I guess it's not really a good comparison. They both just have dates in the title.
Well, is that one like Dracula in 1970?
Oh, yeah.
That sounds fun.
And it was made in 1970, so it's campy and it just feels like the 70s, you know?
We should watch that at some point.
Peter Cushing's in it still, and so is Christopher Lee, so it's just weird having them in that 1970s backdrop. Mm-hmm. That's why I kind of love it. But, like...
That sounds great.
They intended for it to be, like, that campy, so I had fun with it. This, it takes the, like, Dracula in 2000 stuff unironically, and I think that's the problem.
Yeah, there are definitely intentionally campy moments, but it only ever really involves the action. The actual movie takes itself so seriously, and if it just had a little more fun with its concept, it would be a far more enjoyable movie.
Yeah.
So, Dracula 2000, I would not recommend it, really, at all. If it's on Sci-Fi, watch it for a couple minutes. Maybe don't stick with it, because there's barely any action in it.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because really the movie just wants to be The Matrix or Blade, one of those sort of things, and it doesn't succeed at either.
Would you wind up rating it?
I gave it 1.5 stars.
I think I did too. It probably just seems that low because it was right after Blair Witch 2, but I don't think I'd rate it much higher if I ever did.
It probably would have gotten 2 stars otherwise.
Yeah, it's like we should note that it's probably like infinitely more watchable than Blair Witch 2.
Blair Witch 2 is more interesting.
It's got a more interesting premise, but I don't think it's watchable.
You're probably right. My one sentence review for it was, what a miserable excuse for fun.
That's on Letterboxd.
Yeah, that's on Letterboxd. Hit me up. I'm Steinblogger on Letterboxd. Also, we have a Horror Boys Letterboxd account now. We're going to have a couple lists going with that. One will be every horror movie just every movie in general we've ever mentioned on the show, and the other one will be movies mentioned on the episode. We might leave little notes underneath them if they're ones we've seen.
And mine is Not Fox Mulder on Letterboxd. So
This got you a
hit me
follower,
up
by the
as
way.
well. Do what?
My homie Raph started following you after he listened to the episode.
Oh, on Letterboxd?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I think I noticed that, but I'm not sure. Okay, so we moved a whole year later after Dracula 2000, and watched John Carpenter's Ghosts of Mars. Carpenter, of course, is a legend. Like, we all love Halloween, we all love The Thing, we all love some movie Steven's mad at me for not mentioning.
I was about to say, if you haven't seen The Fog, it's on Shudder right now. It is one of my favorite movies, and I didn't really realize that until I rewatched it, but it has possibly my favorite atmosphere of any John Carpenter movie. Dean Cundey's cinematography is gorgeous. It's just a creepy little ghost story. All of the gore in it was edited in later during reshoots because they realized it didn't really buy into the slasher genre and they had to follow up on Halloween. For most of the movie, it is just dripping in atmosphere. It's awesome. It's great.
Well, interestingly enough, I was talking to Claire about it, and I said that the atmosphere of Ghosts of Mars is great, but once the zombies come in, it's not as good of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, oh, so it's like The Fog.
And I wouldn't disagree there.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Like, I didn't like The Fog as much as you did, and I think it was exactly the same problem. So me and Claire kind of decided that John Carpenter is just a master of atmosphere, and sometimes it doesn't always pan out, but you're always going to get an enjoyable movie, one way or the other.
Oh, for sure. Well, did you see The Ward?
I didn't, and I don't want to.
I remember it being just like a made-for-TV feeling horror movie. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen.
Well, he came out of retirement for it, didn't he? Like, Ghost of Mars was supposed to be his last movie.
Well, he didn't intend for it to. He just hated the movie making so much that he quit.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
We should give some background on Ghosts of Mars.
Yeah, so a group of Martian, they're not Martians, but they're from Mars colony. Cops plan to transport an arrested ice cube, but are attacked by vicious ghost demon zombies. That's, of course, my own take on the movie. It stars Ice Cube, of course, who is a real highlight of this movie. Natasha Henstridge is in it as the other lead. I saw a Letterboxd review refer to her as Jamie Lee Curtis light, and I can sort of see that in sort of her voice and mannerisms. And we also got Jason Statham for a while, and Pam Grier is in it, which I thought was a pretty exciting casting to see her in another movie.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think Jackie Brown is the last thing I'd seen her in, so it's nice to see her pop up in something else.
Yeah. We got an interesting soundtrack, whereas Carpenter normally does them himself, as he did with, Halloween or The Thing. Sometimes a little bit of, assistance. This one features Anthrax. So, how 2000s is this, Steven?
The most 2000s. And I take it back. Last episode, I started the episode by saying that I was not a fan of the soundtrack to this movie. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The soundtrack's pretty great. I don't know how well it fits with every scene. Sometimes I think it can be a bit much. But for what the movie's doing, it serves its purpose pretty well. And it's very influential. You'll see it across all sorts of video games and movies from the following decade. Especially the Doom series. I mean, this movie was obviously inspired a bit by Doom, but the way this movie is reflected in Doom 3, I think, is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and even the most recent Doom, definitely some of the landscapes, definitely the soundtrack as well. You can tell that they must have had this movie at least somewhat on their radar, or at least Doom 3.
If you've been wanting to watch the Doom movie, just skip that because it's terrible and watch this because it is very fun in ways the Doom movie is not.
Yeah. This movie was fun in the way that we were disappointed Dracula 2000 wasn't. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I cannot express enough how this movie is just the other two movies if they were any good at all. They don't need to be great movies, they just need to be fun, and they weren't. They were just edgy. And this movie's a little edgy, but it's mostly just pure cheese in a way I really appreciated. It knows what it is.
And as you've mentioned before, it's basically a space remake of sorts of Assault on Precinct 13, which was Carpenter's... Was it his first or his second?
It's his second movie. His first movie is Dark Star, which was a student film he ended up finishing on his own.
Uh-huh.
It's a comedy. I haven't seen it, but I hear it's great.
This keeps the same plot, basically, but it's set on Mars. And both are essentially Westerns, which is Carpenter showing his influences in sort of a fun way of setting them elsewhere.
Yeah, those classic Western directors like Howard Hawks, or who's the guy who did Stagecoach?
John Ford.
Yeah, John Ford, I believe, was his favorite director, and that definitely shows in this. Another fun note was that this was actually written as the sequel to Escape from L.A., but then that bombed at the box office, so they had to retool it. Yeah, this was supposed to have
did
Snake
not know
Plissken
that.
in it. I don't know if he would have been in Natasha Henstridge's role or Ice Cube's role, but I think either one could work depending on how it was written.
Oh, yeah. That would have been kind of fun to have him in the Ice Cube role, except I don't want to lose Ice Cube.
I think so, but I don't want to lose Ice Cube. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think Natasha Henstridge kind of kills it in this, so I wouldn't really want to lose
Yeah.
her either. I like that this is its own thing. I think it probably would have had a wider appeal to fans if it had Snake Plissken in it. And I think it's a shame that this movie gets thrown aside as much as it does, because I really don't think it's any worse than those early Carpenter movies, which are some of my favorite movies of all time. I just think it's made in that exact same style for the most part, and people expected more from something made in 2001. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this movie gets lumped in with The Ward a lot as, like, Carpenter's worst movies. But I think it's being mischaracterized just because it doesn't feel like a Carpenter movie a lot of the time.
Well, I think the biggest issue with this movie is just that the editing in it is awful.
Yeah.
And it's the editor's only credit, according to Letterboxd. He might have some TV credits on IMDb or something.
It's like, I looked and it's entirely TV credits. So, like, stay in the TV zone. Definitely never, ever go to Hollywood ever again, because there's just a ton of, like, crossfades, weird
Transitions, like wipes,
Yeah.
like diagonal wipes. It's rough.
and even just, like, the editing of, like, well, I don't know if it counts, but, like, the editing of, like, the ghost vision is just horrible.
And the ghost vision itself, not the
Yeah.
best. I never really like that
it's
sort of
not
thing.
Yeah, it's like Evil Dead vision, except worse.
Except you have to ruin the image completely and make it really cheesy looking. That just totally takes you out of the movie.
Yeah.
I guess we should say a cool concept in this movie is when you kill one of the ghosts, their soul will leave their body and inhabit someone else. But then they don't really use that as much as they should, which I think is pretty funny.
Yeah, like, it's like they kill all these ghosts, but they don't really have to worry about it at all.
It's just when it's convenient to the plot, someone will get possessed.
I should probably mention these are essentially Martian ghosts that were released when a scientist opened a temple thing on Mars, which is near, like, one of these mining facilities. And that's how they came to be. And they're all angry little Martian men inhabiting humans and making them pierce themselves.
The story to this movie is kind of unveiled non-linearly because it's told through Natasha Henstridge, like, telling the story to the courts, and then people will tell their stories as it goes along, so you get these kind of neat, on an actual editing level, like the way the cuts are composed, it's not very well done, but I did like the way the story was edited together. I thought a lot of that was clever. By the time you get to the final flashbacks, it's getting a little heavy-handed, but for most of the runtime, I thought it was pretty neat the way they were telling those little sides.
The script isn't too bad either. A lot of it actually probably appeared in the screenplay. So I think Carpenter definitely had a hand in that because he's one of the writers.
One of the things I thought was kind of funny in this was that the ghosts couldn't travel through doors. There was a scene where the ghost vision just banged against it, which...
Yeah.
What's going on there? I don't know.
What did you think of Ice Cube's performance, essentially? I know you were really excited about the ending of the film.
Ice Cube is an actor I have a deep love for, because if he's in something where he needs a serious performance like Boys in the Hood or Three Kings, he really delivers. I think he nails it. But in something like this, he knows how to give just the right level of camp where he's not taking you out of the movie, but he's giving the movie the performance it deserves, and I think he just nails it in this. And his character's just so funny. Like, when he first appears, he's wearing basketball camo shorts, but then later on in the movie, he's wearing, like, long Jankos that are also camo, like this ugly red Martian camo. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's part of that Carpenter nailing this, like, badass campy character that he does a lot in like Big Trouble in Little China, for instance. Like he's got a handle on how to make characters both badass and like
relatable in a way, flawed.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you don't see flawed heroes in action movies anymore. You get John Wick, who gets shot and just keeps fighting, and it's cool, it's badass, but I kind of miss Kurt Russell shooting that guy with the Uzi in Big Trouble, and then like someone calls him out on that being his first kill.
Yeah.
It's been I could have that scenario wrong. It's been a while since I've seen Big Trouble.
Yeah, it's been a while for me too.
Maybe we should rewatch it on the podcast.
Yeah, we can do like actually good movies at some point.
Hey, we did a good movie just now.
Yeah, that's true. Ghost of Mars was pretty good. I felt like a lot of the casting was just really good. Like, even Joanna Cassidy as the scientist. I like her from the TV show 6 Feet Under.
I thought she was Jamie Lee Curtis light, honestly.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, do you see, like, the comparison between Natasha Henstridge and Jamie Lee Curtis?
Not really. Jamie Lee Curtis's characters are a lot more flawed than Henstridge's generally.
That's true, and Henstridge is not, like, helpless.
Yeah. If anything, she's more the Kurt Russell of this.
Actually, that's a good point. Like, Ice Cube would be more... Like, if we're still doing the Big Trouble in Little China comparison, Ice Cube would be one of the badass ninja people. Mm-hmm. I guess it's Kung Fu.
And while we're on casting, I should point out both of the train conductors look exactly like Dennis Quaid.
Oh, no. I thought that was Dennis Quaid for at least 10 seconds.
One of them looks a little more like Sam Neill, but it's both close.
It's sort of like a synthesis and an aged Dennis Quaid and Sam Neill.
I'm really happy that this movie was made when it was, because it falls prey to some of the... Like, it's edited like a music video at the time, which is unfortunate. And there's maybe a bit too much slow-mo, but if this had been made 2 to 3 years later, there would have been so much shaky cam, and it would have just been so hard to follow the action. Whereas here, even if some of the blocking isn't super easy to follow from shot to shot in the bigger scenes, for the most part, it's just very fluid. And the cinematography is gorgeous. It's one of the last, like, true Carpenter-looking movies, I think, with those beautiful anamorphic lenses. By the way, if you watch this movie on Stars through Amazon, they crop it to 16:9, and that is not okay.
I don't know, like, why would they do that?
So that it would fill the whole TV.
Are you making fun of backcountry people as you chastised Blair Witch for doing?
No, I'm making fun of the type of person who would decide to pay money to watch Ghosts of Mars. Like myself.
Wait, what? Yeah, I get the music video editing part, but like I agree that it sort of works just because it has that soundtrack.
No, yeah, there are a couple moments where it's working, like Natasha Henstridge's trip scene while she's tripping, which helps her defeat the aliens inside of her. I thought that was really cool, but then even at the end, they still find a way to ruin it. There are a couple moments where it almost works.
Speaking of her, like, drug addiction, like, I thought that was a nice addition to make her pretty flawed herself. Mm-hmm. And then she, like, our two main characters are, like, a prisoner and then a drug addict cop, you know, like,
yeah,
they're flawed, but they're still just beating up a bunch of ghost demon alien zombies.
And their flaws are what help them survive, which I think is always fun too. It's a nice split sort of thing.
Well, like, the ghosts won't enter her when she's like high, essentially. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I thought that was a nice touch, but I don't know what else to say about this. You got anything?
I do have one last thing I would like to add. I love that their plan was to nuke the ghosts so hard that the ghosts themselves died. And they're like, we wouldn't be able to nuke this facility, would we? And then the not Jamie Lee Curtis goes, no, unless we lifted these coils and did it just like this. That's how we could nuke them. And then their plan totally backfires because at the end the whole ghost army still invades the city.
I don't know, but that nuke shot was, I mean, I felt my testosterone flowing when they blew that nuke up. And that whole sequence on the train is just pretty fantastic.
Yeah, there's some bad CG from time to time, but for the most part, when it's used for the gore, it's effective. And it's just to the time. Like, it really didn't take me out of the movie at all. I still think this movie delivers on the spectacle.
Well, did the CG of Book of Shadows take you out of it?
Was there CG in that? I don't even remember.
Well, like
the bad
ghost
ghost lady?
girl,
Oh, that was so bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Tanner, would you recommend Ghosts of Mars?
I would. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, which may be a little high, but I think I just appreciated it not being horrible like the two films we watched before it.
I almost gave it a 4.
Oh, you did?
But then I gave it a 3.5 and a heart.
Oh.
I think it's Carpenter's best movie after They Live.
Oh, I can see that. It's definitely his best 2000s effort.
Oh, that's for sure.
I feel a need to defend it because it is, pretty consistently just like tossed away as like garbage. Even at the time, it's not even just that it's aged badly. Like, people just genuinely didn't like it. I think it's a misunderstood Carpenter gem.
I hadn't seen it since middle school, so I figured I was just a dumb middle schooler when I saw it. But I had just as much fun watching it this time as I did when I first saw it. So I think it's worth giving it a shot if it sounds like it could be your cup of tea. If you like John Carpenter, or if you like dumb early 2000s action movies or horror movies, it's like something in the vein of the first Paul W.S. Anderson, Resident Evil, except delivers more on the gore, and it's just a lot more fun than that is. But there's a certain style to that movie that I think this is close to.
I'd agree with that. I think it's ridiculous, and I think it's dated, and I think it's flawed, but it's still just a fun watch. And it's like rare that you can say that about these early 2000s movies, as we've recently learned.
Yeah, no, it is really just don't watch the first two movies we talked about at all. Watch this because it is what those movies are trying to be, except good and fun and just a blast. Come on.
It's good times for all. Thanks for tuning in tonight, guys. This is the Horror Boys Podcast. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page. You can follow us both on Letterboxd. I'm not Fox Mulder. Steven is Steinblogger. And we also have a Horror Boys Letterboxd page, which will keep track of all the movies we've watched.
And mentioned.
That'll help keep you in the loop if you're feeling that need. All right, we'll see you next week.
Stay fresh, y'all.
Hey there, people.
Your DJ R.L. Steinblocker of 88.1 The Grizz, KBTL, El Dorado, Kansas, where we have the tunes.
Got a job doing radio promo, and none of the jocks can even tell I'm